Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. You know, Halloween has once again come and gone. And with Thanksgiving and probably the most celebrated holiday of the year coming up, I thought now would be a great time to start working on my 2020 bucket list. One of them being make a stop motion film. If you don't know, stop motion is a live action animation where you basically move your puppet a little bit like that, take a picture, move it another little bit, take another picture, and then when you stitch that all together, it'll make one continuous animation. It's a very time-consuming process with 1 second needing 24 frames. That means if you try to do a 1-minute scene, you would need 1,440 different pictures. This also used to be a very popular technique for special effects, but with the advancement of computer-generated technology, it's died down. Nowadays, you see movies like Caroline, Kubo and the Two Strings, Isle of Dogs, and the Shaun the Sheep movies, which are completely made using stop motion. But there's one film I'm sure you've at least heard of or seen at Hot Topic. The perfect transition movie to take you from spooky season right into the jolly gift-giving holidays. That's right, today we're renting out Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. As a kid, Tim Burton loved watching the Rankin Bass specials every holiday season. Tuning in to watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and How the Grinch Stole Christmas was an event for him. Growing up in Burbank, California, it was difficult for Burton to really get into the holiday season. There wasn't any snow and the weather didn't get too cold, so for him, he knew Christmas was near when different networks started showing Christmas-themed TV. Of course, Burton also loved Halloween and its twisted nature, so much so that during Christmas, he would stick Halloween decorations in the Christmas tree as a visual joke for himself. The idea of combining both of his favorite holidays together was part of the fun for him. Walking down the store aisles and seeing all the Halloween or Christmas decorations was a major part of how he got into the sense of the holiday, since the weather never really did it for him. One day, sometime in the early 70s, Burton saw a store window being changed from Halloween to Christmas decorations, so then he wrote it into a poem called The Nightmare Before Christmas. This poem stuck very closely to the final version of the film, except without any of the Sally or Oogie Boogie subplots. In 1980, Burton was hired onto the Disney team and worked on films like Fox and the Hound and did some design work for The Black Cauldron. During this time, Burton started pitching the film around. He went to television stations and different publishers, and the one thing that stuck with him was the idea to have the film made with stop motion after being highly inspired by Rankin Bass and the late legend of Ray Harryhausen since he was a youth. Networks would offer him 30-minute television specials, with the catch being that it had to be made with cell animation. Thankfully, Burton resisted these offers if it meant compromising on his original vision. Afterwards, he got the opportunity to work on his own personal projects, so it was in this time where he made his 2 short films, Vincent and Frankenweenie. It was also during this time that he was trying to get Nightmare Before Christmas made. After his success with these short films, he was fired from Disney in 1984, the same year Frankenweenie was completed. Burton has stated that his Disney eyes are what got him kicked out of the animation department because he couldn't draw in that Disney style. While it was a negative for him at the time, it ended up being a positive because he was able to pursue his true style of art. Ultimately, Burton had to leave Disney to find success making films like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, and Edward Scissorhands, then come back to finally work on his passion project, Nightmare Before Christmas, which Disney technically held the film rights to. Disney wanted to show capabilities of technical and storytelling achievements that were present in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, so they greenlit the project and handed it over to Burton to do his thing. According to Danny Elfman, Disney never asked to approve anything because they knew Burton was in a completely other world. Alas for Burton, he had a packed schedule working on Batman Returns and gearing up to direct Ed Wood, so he asked his friend Henry Selick to take over directing for him since he knew how time-consuming stop motion would be. Selick had gone to CalArts with people who would end up directing animation like John Lasseter, Brad Bird, John Musker, and others. Burton was a few years behind Selick's graduating class, so it wasn't until 1979 1979 when the two met at the Burbank Adult Education Center in a life drawing class. The two went on to both work for Disney. Selick later left Disney and moved to the San Francisco area to work with a team of passionate stop-motion animators that made station IDs for MTV and shot many of the animated Pillsbury Doughboy commercials. Because of Burton's tight schedule, he didn't get a chance to meet with Selick often. That's when visual consultant for Nightmare, Rick Heinrichs, flew to San Francisco to meet with Selick and told him that Burton wanted to make a film called The Nightmare Before Christmas and wanted Selick to take over directing, since Burton felt he could completely trust Selick to do a faithful job on his passion project without Burton having to step in and co-direct it. Selick was supposed to do an MTV show called A Slow Bob in the Lower Dimensions, but left the project after being offered to direct his first feature.
In the first place, I was chosen for the job because I'm from the same planet, if not the same neighborhood as Tim.
By the time Selick had joined the project, Burton was nearing completion with the songs that he had been working on with frequent collaborator Danny Elfman. Burton had come to Elfman with his Nightmare Before Christmas poem and illustrations. There was technically a script, but it wasn't really coming together. All Burton knew was he wanted to make an operatic type musical, and that was it. Since neither of them had any experience working on musicals, there was a period of time where they didn't even know how to begin, with the question being who does what first. Burton and Elfman decided that they didn't want to make a Broadway musical with a lot of talk, then the characters burst into a song. They wanted it to be more of an operetta where there's some dialogue that goes into the music to keep the story flowing. With that agreement, Burton would go to Elfman's place and they would sit down and talk about the story and emotions of the characters. Burton would bring pictures of the characters, and if he didn't have one, he would ask Elfman for a piece of paper and draw it then and there. About every 3 to 4 days, Burton would head over to Elfman's and update him on how Jack is feeling and what he's doing. Burton would describe Jack walking in the forest and singing about how he doesn't know who he is, and Elfman, being the godly talent that he is, would start to think of the song while Burton was still describing the scene to him. Elfman would even shoo Burton out and immediately start working on the song before any other noise or music could jeopardize those ideas of his. Then 3 days later, Elfman would show Burton the song, Burton would dig it, and Elfman would ask what's the next part of the story. They did this process for about 10 songs, and so they pieced together all the tracks in this strange method without thinking ahead and focusing on one part of the story at a time.
If the credits were completely accurate, it should have said additional lyrics by Tim Burton, because he has some really good lines in there, and especially in the early songs. And a little at a time, about every 3 or 4 days, we'd get together and he'd just tell me, he said, this is Jack, and here's what's happening. And he's walking out into the forest and he's feeling really sad, and he's gonna sing a song about how sad he feels because he just doesn't really know who he is, and he'd start talking about it, and as he'd be talking about it, I'd start hearing a song.
Elfman did the vocals with the only intention to figure out how he wanted it to sound like. Over the course of that year, he unexpectedly started growing attached to Jack and would feel hurt just thinking of the idea that someone else would do the songs, even though he claims there are much better singers than him. During this time, Danny Elfman was still in a band that he formed in 1979 called Oingo Boingo, and was feeling unfulfilled, wondering if there was something more for him, with the feelings of wanting to leave the band. It was for this reason that he felt a personal attachment to songs like Jack's Lament.
On so many levels, I related to Jack and his plight, because here he was the king of Halloween Land and looking for something else in his life. And I was in a similar period with the band Oingo Boingo that I was with, because I was the king of my own little Halloween Land, but I really wanted to do something else. And I didn't know what, but suddenly films came along and I was really enjoying doing them, and I saw all these doors opening. And like Jack, film scoring was for me Jack's visit to Christmas Town.
With the song's demos nearing completion, Elfman built up the courage to tell Burton about his attachment to the songs. But before he could finish explaining, Burton assured Elfman that he would play the singing voice of Jack. Selick felt this was an incredible choice to make because the high energy Elfman brought to his live Oingo Boingo performances matched with Jack Skellington's ambitious personality. By the end of this musical process, they had a complete sense of story and musical numbers, so Elfman sent each song to Henry Selick, who now had something to start off with. This was also the groundwork for the script, which didn't exist yet.
Danny was almost like a writer on it, in the sense that, I think I talked to him about it in terms of kind of a outline and beat sheet, and then he started thinking of songs.
At this time, Selick and the rest of the filmmakers didn't know where they were heading. Burton and Elfman were wrapping up the songs and sending them to director Henry Selick so he could start getting a good idea for the film's structure. Michael McDowell, who had previously written Beetlejuice, wrote an adaptation of the story, but there are some creative differences he had with Burton and sadly couldn't work on the film much due to serious health issues that led to his death in 1999. Some of his ideas did stay in the final film, like Sally throwing herself out the window and putting herself back together. The screenwriting job went over to Caroline Thompson, who had written Edward Scissorhands. Thompson was Elfman's girlfriend at the time, and the two of them were living together. This means Thompson would often hear Elfman's songs as he worked, so Burton suggested she write the script since at that point she was very familiar with the basic story. Thompson went on and stitched together the first draft in August of 1991. The first thing Selick received was the song What's This? So that became the first sequence to get planned out, storyboarded, and built puppets and sets for. What's interesting is that they didn't know what exactly would happen beforehand or after. Selick knew the main plot points, which was enough for him to know that Christmas Town needed to be soft and sweet compared to the rest of the film. According to Selick, starting up Nightmare and going into production was the craziest experience he's had because there wasn't even a script when they started. They only had a few songs from Elfman. Burton was busy with Batman Returns and was set to go straight to Ed Wood, so Selick didn't have the opportunity to have many conferences with Burton and talk about how it's all going to come together to make the film. He was essentially just animating music videos for a while. At the time, however, Selick loved the project so much that he never doubted the fact that the film would unveil itself and be coherent at the end, which, as we can see, it clearly did. As soon as he signed on to direct, Selick gathered up a team of animators of people he had worked with in San Francisco, people from Industrial Light and Magic, and people from England.
It's like when you cast an actor, you want them to bring what they bring to it, and it's the same with an animator, and that's the exciting sort of subconscious thing about this whole process, is that you really do feel an animator coming through it, and that's just really exciting to see it when it works.
With the team assembled and Elfman sending in songs, the filmmakers were able to start pre-production. The first step was to storyboard the film and figure out the pacing to see how many frames they need for each scene. Joseph Ranft was the storyboard supervisor, and they worked with Selick to visualize and plan out exactly what the film was going to be. They drew out every shot they wanted in the film very specifically, then edited the entire movie using storyboard images, recorded voices, and rough music. This is called an animatic. With live-action films, many directors film their movie, then figure out how they want to rearrange shots or fix the pace in the edit. With any sort of animation, the director essentially edits their film only using the animatic. That way the animators know exactly what scenes they need, which helps them save a lot of time and money. As the animatics are being worked on, the art director starts creating sets from scratch using the storyboard, Burton's drawings, and Selick's ideas as reference. Burton has that distinct style of a German expressionist film combined with the illustrations of Dr. Seuss, so art director Dean Taylor used that imagery as a major reference. They also built out different color palettes for each scene using black, white, and orange in Halloween Town with moody lighting, using bright, vibrant colors in Christmas Town with fast camera movements, and making the real world a lot more simpler with aligned angles and a pastel color palette. Taylor would then make 5 or 6 different looks that Selick would look at and give his opinions on to boil it down to one final look. They wanted to make this film look like living illustrations of artists like Ronald Searle or Edward Gorey, with their elaborate textures and cross-hatching. In fact, they actually took sets and sprayed clay or plaster on them, then they scribbled lines all around the piece to give it that extra sketch textural feel to make it look like a living illustration. Once the concept art was done, the next step became to figure out the look in 3 dimensions. Quarter-scale drawings were made, then set designer Greg Olson would make a quarter-scale mock-up to figure out and confirm how they want the set to look like before they build the final piece that is 4 times larger, resulting in around a 20-foot set. It's at this point where they also figure out how they want to break up the set into different removable pieces. The animators asked the set designer to make the sets in a way where they don't have to reach more than 2 feet to get to the character models so they can animate it. Set designers would then build trapdoors where animators could open, make their animation, then close it and get the shot. Even though this was stop motion and they used small sets, they still lit the scenes the same way they would any other live action film. They used around 20 to 30 small film lights to create the dramatic effects they were looking for. Director of photography Peter Kozachik's biggest challenge was to avoid making it look like they took shortcuts. With 8 different camera crews working simultaneously, keeping the film's lighting consistent was key. In the final film, there are many shots where the camera moves fluidly around the set. To get this effect, they had to mount the camera on a motion control system, which precisely moved the camera with every frame taken so that when they played back all the individual frames, it would look like one natural camera movement. Dave Hanks was the motion control operator who worked alongside the animators. Selick would give him an idea of the type of shot that he's looking for, then Hanks would program the camera and give it a start and end position. Then the camera would move a little bit, the animator would make the animation, the camera would move another little bit, then another animation, and so on until they got the final shot. In stop motion, there are many different ways that you can create your characters. You can make cutouts, clay figures, or in this case, puppets. The process of creating these puppets started with what's called an armature, which is essentially the character's skeleton. After receiving a scale-accurate drawing, they would figure out where their joints need to be. They would then create a mold of the character, split it open, lay in the steel armature, place the mold back, and inject the mold with a foam latex material that completely covers the armature. Then they bake this entire piece in a giant oven, take it out, and now you've got a stop-motion puppet. These are then sent over to the puppet fabrication department, where that team adds in the paint job, clothing, hair, fur, or any other thing the puppet needs to look its absolute best on screen. With this process done, the characters are sent over to the animation team ready to be animated. Nightmare Before Christmas ended up having around 60 individual characters, with at least 3 to 4 duplicates of each one. By the end of production, they had gone through this process at least 200 different times, and since there were as many as 20 different sets and as many as 15 animators animating all at once, they likely had to build a lot more puppets than that. The character of Jack Skellington was designed as a tall Spider-Man-like man, so they had him move in a similar way a spider would move. And because Jack was tall and thin, having him wear all black made it difficult for him not to blend too much in the shadows, so Selick ended up suggesting they add stripes to his clothing to help him stick out more. Also, Jack Skellington is technically the first Disney main character that doesn't have any eyeballs. The studio suggested to put eyeballs in Jack, but Burton and Selick decided against the idea because they felt it was more interesting to do without, since now they had the challenge of giving heart and soul to this character with no eyes. In the early stages of Nightmare Before Christmas, the filmmakers had to do some tests with Jack's walk to prove to the studio and themselves that his character would have a good amount of personality conveyed through film simply with his look and movements. They started with basic armatures to get a quick feel for how he would walk depending on his feelings. According to Burton, they thought about having a move like Fred Astaire or Vincent Price to have that elegance of movement. Then they started thinking of combining all these different inspirations into a spider Fred Astaire, and that led them to nailing down Jack's walk. Later on during production, animators would essentially make rough cuts of animations to show to Selick. Selick would then give his changes and they would do 3 to 4 versions of this, then the animator would animate the final hero shot that would be inserted to the final film. Similar to how in a live action film you have your actors do various takes. It's the same except a ton slower. In fact, animating would take days to complete, but the lighting, sets, and characters had to completely stay the same. This would turn into an issue if you accidentally bumped into a lighter camera. At that point, when you played back the animation at normal speed, you would see jarring changes. In traditional cel animation, you could go back to the frame and redraw it or fix it. Nowadays, most animation is computer animated, so that might not even be a problem with keyframes. But with stop motion, if you were 3 days into a piece and you bumped into something, you would have to completely redo that shot. To animate Jack's many facial expressions and mouth movements, the animators had to hand sculpt hundreds of different replacement heads. They had all the different mouth shapes mixed in with the different emotions Jack is feeling throughout the film. They had expression sheets that would let the animators know at which frame Jack would need to have a different numbered head. To make these sheets, they took a photograph of each individual head they made, uploaded it onto the computer, then would pick a head for each syllable of the character's dialogue or songs.
Oh, somewhere deep inside of these bones, an emptiness began to grow.
This helped the animators quickly know which head they needed to use for the specific frame they were at. Sally had the best armature made because Selick wanted her character to feel a bit off balance. She went through the same process of having multiple different facial expressions made and switched out for every couple of frames. The difference is that with Jack, it was easy to simply switch out the entire head because he was basically bald. Sally was a different case because of her long hair. Since they couldn't just switch out heads, they opted to give her different masks to switch out from. For her movements, they initially had her walk be a bit more unsteady as she was a living ragdoll. After some tests, they decided to opt out of this decision because it made her look drunk and instead went for a more stable walk. For Boogie's puppet, they needed a tough armature to handle his massive character. Rick Heinrichs was Boogie's animator, and according to Selick, he was the animator because he was one of the strongest ones to do it, since moving his puppet was like wrestling with an alligator, to the point where anyone who animated Boogie would end up sweating. A subtle thing that is used for many special effects to give a character more life is simply blinking. It goes a long way into separating these inanimate objects from a puppet to a talking skeleton or pumpkin monster. Instead of making extra heads that are blinking, they had basic eyelids that would pop into the puppet's eyes for 3 or 4 frames. Another aspect that helps these puppets come to life is their movement. It may sound simple, but animators spend a good while really thinking about how a character moves around. A big part of being able to animate is the ability to act things out for yourself and really get a feel for it. Many animators, or Henry Selick, would act out characters' movements to see how they would realistically move. In one of the Blu-ray special features, one of the animators states that he feels many 2D and 3D animators are in a way frustrated or shy actors who wouldn't get in front of a camera, so they let the world see them through the movements of an animated character, basically hiding behind the puppets. Once the director has given them blocking instructions, it's really up to the animator to bring in their own style and become the character they're animating.
You can't just make it move. You can't just have it wiggle around and it's moving so it's alive. The difference between just making something move and actually bringing a character to life is huge, and that's the stop motion animator's greatest challenge.
Once the scene was animated and picture locked, the last thing they needed to add in was all the atmospheric effects like ghosts, snow, smoke, shadows, fire, and electric lightning bolts. Visual effects artist Gordon Baker would receive the clean footage. Then he would go frame by frame and add in the effects. For example, there was this shot with the packages being delivered by using string to make it look like they were floating. Baker would then rotoscope these presents out, and in case you don't know, rotoscoping is the process of basically cutting out the packages, adding the animation of the ghosts, then layering back in the packages on top of the ghosts so it looks like they're carrying the presents. Zero the Ghost Dog was one of Burton's original characters in the early stages of Nightmare Before Christmas. He was like a magician's handkerchief. They made Zero's body of lead, which made the animation very fluid to make it look like a floating cloth. They also used a puppet head similar to how Jack had. The way they animated the ghost-like effect of Zero was combined optically and in camera on the original negative by the use of what's called a beam splitter. This is the technique of having a half silver mirror in front of the lens and simply having the reflection of Zero interact with Jack. So they would animate Zero behind a black backdrop and light him with a light source. Then Zero's reflection would show up in the mirror that's placed in front of the camera. This is the same technique used in the Haunted Mansion at the Disney theme parks. Technically, Selick and Burton cast the film while the animators were mostly done animating all of the singing scenes with Jack. Because Elfman was the singing voice of Jack Skellington, the filmmakers started looking for a good voice that would complement Elfman's voice. They held auditions and went with Chris Sarandon, who had done Fright Night, Child's Play, and The Princess Bride, to name a few. Catherine O'Hara was cast to do Sally's voice after working with Burton on Beetlejuice. She also did the voice acting for Shock alongside Elfman, who voiced Beryl, and Paul Reubens, who voiced Locke. Reuben is most known for his character of Pee-wee Herman. Burton's feature debut was in 1985 with Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and Burton later cast him as the Penguin's father in Batman Returns. Ken Page did the amazing voice for Oogie Boogie. William Hickey did the voice of Dr. Finkelstein, who was in Tales from the Crypt, Puppet Master, and Tales from the Dark Side. For the character of Sandy Claus, they had cast Vincent Price. Unfortunately, Price had recently lost his wife, and when they were recording his lines, there was a deep, frail sadness in his voice. While Selick appreciates the honor of being able to work with him, in the big picture of the film, it didn't work out. They ended up casting local actor Edward Ivory to do the voice, which worked in providing that traditional Santa voice with that hint of authority. With the film cast, it was now a matter of animating the film. It took a team of over 100 artists, 19 sound sound stages, 230 sets, hundreds of puppets, and 13 of the most brilliant animators to put the film together over the course of 3 years. Once the film was picture locked, it was time for Elfman to add in the final score, which was a lot more difficult than he expected. The reason being that when there isn't a song, there's likely a score. And the hard part of a score inside a musical is that it's often coming out of a track, and it has to come out of the song in an elegant way and lead into another track, so the score has to start to pre-echo little bits of the songs that are about to come, if that makes sense. Because of copyright, I can't show many examples, but next time you watch the film, pay a little more attention to the score and you'll notice how it mixes in different instrumentals from all the songs. They didn't feel this film needed big sounding music, so Elfman assembled a small orchestra and recorded the score inside the same room as Pee-wee's Big Adventure. They purposely chose to record in that room because it had a smaller, more intimate feel to it. By the end of production, there were 109,440 frames taken for the film. As they were nearing completion, Disney decided to have a test screening and came to the conclusion that there was no audience for this movie and kids hated it. All the merchandise was pulled and the marketing changed its target audience from kids to adults. Children went into the screening expecting another Disney film like Aladdin or Little Mermaid, but instead they got the twisted world of Tim Burton. Plus, it didn't help at all that they showed an unfinished version of the film, with some scenes being depicted through storyboards. Keep in mind, kids have very low attention spans for that kind of stuff, to the point where when they were questioned about their thoughts on the film, they asked why there were drawings in the movie.
It's like kids are the best judge, you know? It's like sometimes I think adults have this tendency to go, oh, that's going to be too scary or weird, but I grew up myself as a child watching monster movies and watching things like that, and you know, I think a lot of times adults are quite surprised that their kids kind of get into it, and I never felt personally that it was anything, you know, overly scary or overly, you know, over the top. You know, again, I find kids to be the best judges of what they can handle or what they can't handle.
Nightmare Before Christmas was originally set to be released by Walt Disney Pictures and be a part of that animation catalog, but because the studio felt the film would be too dark and scary for kids, they ended up releasing it through their adult film label Touchstone Pictures. The film was released to theaters worldwide in 1993 and grossed a little over $50 million. With a budget of $18 million, the movie made 2.7 times its budget, which was great financially. Unfortunately, it was considered a sleeper hit because no one really talked about the film after its theatrical run.
There goes Christmas.
Similar to movies like The Wizard of Oz, Vertigo, and The Big Lebowski, Nightmare Before Christmas started gaining more attention and appreciation years after its initial release. It wasn't until Burton and Elfman went to do press work for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and saw Nightmare Before Christmas themed club in Tokyo that they realized the film was gaining its fans. After a decade, Disney felt they found their audience, and that's when they started re-releasing it. The movie likely failed because in 1993, there wasn't anything like Nightmare, so audiences were thrown off by the stop-motion animation and the dark imagery. It's understandable how this movie didn't gain any fans through its initial release. Audiences hadn't seen anything like this at the time, so they probably needed to let the film sit in for a while. Thanks to its home release, the film gained a newfound appreciation. I've rented this out for the weekend and it's got some goodies inside, so let's go ahead and take a look. Duracell. A powerful new force coming to video in 1995. I'll probably have to check that out sometime. Do you want to be king? You'd better learn to roar, pounce, and fight with all four. Do I look like an Animorph? Family PC, your home computer companion. No. Laugh like the Dickens watching the best-selling Christmas video? What? Do they mean Gonzo as Charles Dickens or the real Charles Dickens? Who's laughing here? Aw, these are always super nostalgic to look at. This one came with some Snow White stickers. I love these advertisements for Disney tapes. There's something about it that's so appealing to me. I do have one question though. Why is there a Johnny Carson ad in the back? I might be wrong, but I don't think kids would be interested in that. I guess I'll just assume it's for the parents. Now for a quick little rant, how come Disney had to package their VHS tapes in these clamshell boxes? I get they were trying to distinguish themselves from the competition, but these just aren't nearly as nice as the regular boxes that tapes came in. Very unfortunate. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into the story and see what kind of structure lies beneath this terrifying musical and what changes were made from the first draft leading up to its final picture. The film starts off with an opening narration that introduces us to the concept of all the different holiday worlds.
For the story that you are about to be told took place in the holiday worlds of old.
The narrator is voiced by Ed Ivory, who also did the voice of Sandy Claus. In the first draft of the script, Sandy Claus narrated the prologue and epilogue. You can hear a version of these in the film's soundtrack, where they replaced Ed Ivory with the great Sir Patrick Stewart, which, in my opinion, fit the tone of the film a lot better.
But once a calamity ever so great occurred when two holidays met by mistake.
Nothing against Mr. Ivory, but Stewart's voice adds an extra storytelling spice to it. Aside from the narration, the first draft would have opened with an old-fashioned calendar that would take us through the different holiday worlds like Valentineville, Easter World, and 4th of July. Then the calendar would stop on October 31st, and that would take us straight into the first musical number. The narrator takes us into Halloween Town, where we get this amazing shot of who I can safely assume is Jack Skellington hanging as a scarecrow. This is a wonderfully directed opening scene that quickly sets the tone for the rest of the film and introduces us to the ordinary world. I've always wondered how people write musicals. This script for Nightmares shows us that you can use italics to differentiate the regular dialogue from the lyrics, or you can simply write something like this where they put down the name of the song and just describe the character's feelings or actions. Last thing before moving on, in the script, we would have seen Sally sing and celebrate more, which is hard to imagine now since her character is very reserved. After wrapping up their Halloween celebration, the citizens of Halloween Town start to bombard Jack with compliments. Feeling overwhelmed, he sneaks out during the award ceremony and heads over to the town's cemetery where Sally is hiding from the controlling Dr. Finkelstein. Thinking he's alone, Jack's lament starts as he pours his unfulfilled heart out.
Yet year after year, it's the same routine.
According to Selick, Burton had a few rules for Halloween Town, one of them being there is no magic. Selick had to trick Burton a bit because he liked the idea of having the hill unwind for Jack to step off and have his great exit. To convince Burton, Selick told him that it was simply a mechanical hill that unraveled itself, so then he got that into the film. With his head bowed down, Jack heads into the woods with his ghost dog Zero. Sally relates to Jack's song, but heads over to pick up some more deadly nightshade for her sleeping potions. The next morning, the mayor arrives at Jack's house to start planning out next year's Halloween, but discovers the house has been empty all night.
Jack, please, I'm only an elected official here. I can't make decisions by myself.
Meanwhile, Jack is still wandering in the woods when he comes across the different holiday trees. Appalled by the Christmas tree, he's accidentally sucked into Christmas Town, causing the inciting incident. Originally, we were supposed to see Jack go through a pumpkin-shaped door that led to some other woods where he would see multiple holiday doorways. A very tiny comparison, but good example of how you can cut out the smallest things to keep the pacing moving. Jack is transported to another world and lands in a sheet of snow, only to have a jaw-dropping moment where he sees the bright lights. This leads us into the following song.
What's this? What's this? There's color everywhere. What's this? There's white things in the air.
For this song, Elfman made a list of all the different things Jack would be seeing for the first time, such as a snowflake, a toy, a light, a child, etc. He was inspired by musical artists Gilbert and Sullivan to write a song that would almost be a tongue twister, in the same way that Modern Major General was hard to sing.
It taught him that is vegetable, animal, mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
Back in Halloween Town, the mayor sounds the alarm to look out for Jack since there's only 364 days until Halloween.
We've got to find Jack!
I find it hilarious how the mayor wants to plan out the next Halloween even though they just wrapped up the holiday the night before. Even though it's just a joke, it really makes you sympathize more with Jack since this suggests that every day of his life goes into planning out the same exact holiday. Back in Sally's home, we see her adding deadly nightshade and frog's breath to Dr. Finkelstein's soup, which will cause him to fall asleep.
You want me to starve
Another script comparison, in page 31 of the first draft, Sally ends up drinking the soup she made for Dr. Finkelstein, which differs in the final film where she uses the whole spoon to drain out the soup. That later gives her the opportunity to go to Jack's meeting. In page 33 of the script, it shows that Sally slept through the town meeting announcement. Later, when Jack goes to visit the doctor, Sally is hungover from her own poison and is shocked when she opens the door for Jack. My guess is that this was changed to have Sally attend the meeting because I wasn't able to find a moment in the script where Sally really finds out what Jack is wanting to do. Out of nowhere, it seems like she just found out, which is very understandable for a first draft to have hiccups like that since you're still getting a feel for the story. As the town citizens continue looking for Jack, they hear Zero in the distance and see Jack riding into town with a giant mysterious sack. In the next scene, Town Meeting Hall is sung as a way to introduce Halloween Town to the wondrous world of Christmas Town. I'd consider this the call to adventure since Jack has hyped up the entire town to have their own Christmas. Jack goes home and starts his research to find a way to explain that joyous Christmas feeling. Back at Sally's, Dr. Finkelstein locks her up in her room for poisoning him. Soon after, Jack shows up requesting to borrow equipment to continue his Christmas research. This leads us into a montage of Jack performing many of his failed experiments.
Interesting reaction. But what does it mean?
Meanwhile, Sally's preparing a sweet little basket with a special drink for Jack. She sends the basket down with a pulley system, then jumps out the window. After making that hard landing, Sally gets up and resews herself back together. Henry Selick wrestled to decide what material would be inside of Sally when she ripped. It seems for a second they thought about making it a tiny bit gory, but Selick made the final decision of having autumn leaves act as stuffing. Back in her room, Dr. Finkelstein finds out Sally has escaped again. The script shows us that Sally originally left Dr. Finkelstein a letter where she said her goodbyes and left him soup that wasn't spiked. I imagine they took this out since it wouldn't make sense for Sally to leave a letter if she's made multiple failed attempts to escape. As Jack continues his research, he receives Sally's gift, but before he can thank her, she runs away like the shy girl that she is and hides behind the wall to pick out a flower. Aw, look, it's a Christmas tree! Ooh, damn, that sucks. The next morning leads us straight into the next song, Jack's Obsession, one of my personal favorites from the film.
Or perhaps it's really not as deep as I've been led to think. Am I trying much too hard?
Thinking he has it figured out, Jack starts to assign different jobs to the residents of Halloween, including having Dr. Finkelstein build out flying reindeer.
What are you doing here?
We're then introduced to the little brats Lock, Shock, and Barrel, which I think they're named as a gun reference. Jack gives them a special job and sends them on their way, leading us into the B plot of the film with Boogie. According to Burton, the mayor represents a two-faced nature of politics, which should have been obvious to me, but for some reason I barely caught that. Lock, Shock, and Barrel were the bad kids on Halloween that felt more okay with causing mischief. The Twilight Zone episode, The Masks, made a big impact on Burton as a kid, so that's where he got his inspiration for Lock, Shock, and Barrel, since he wanted to make a more lighthearted version of that. We follow the kids into their song where we find out their mission is to kidnap the Sandy Claus.
Kidnap the Sandy Claus, lock him up real tight. Throw away the key and then turn off all the lights.
It's during this musical number where we get a glimpse of Oogie Boogie and how he's the terrifying outcast of the town. You could technically say we see him in the beginning, but how would you know he's the antagonist? Kidnap the Sandy Claus was another song where Elfman and Burton would sit down and figure out what they can do, similar to how they both figured out What's This? Back in City Hall, after Jack asks musicians to recreate some Christmas music, Sally tries to warn him about her vision, but Jack is too dedicated to his idea that he simply ignores her and asks her to create his Sandy Claus outfit. Boogie's kids return with the wrong holiday figure, bringing back the Easter Bunny instead of Saint Nick himself. Jack sends the kids back, and then we cut to Dr. Finkelstein making a more improved version of Sally that won't keep running away from him. Man, that sounds a lot darker when I describe it out loud. Our next musical number is Making Christmas. With the days counting down to the big holiday, we see how Halloween Town and Christmas Town are both preparing for this jolly event.
When the full moon starts to shine, we'll all sing out.
It's Christmas time!
It could have been very easy for Jack to come off as unlikable and someone who's trying to steal a wonderful holiday, but the fact that he's so confident he can make something better is admirable. You can clearly tell that he doesn't mean to cause any harm, and instead is like a 6-year-old kid trying to make his mom breakfast in bed without knowing how anything in the kitchen works. During this song, there is a little deleted scene taken out, clearly for pacing reasons.
That's interesting. Ooh, I like that.
Christmas presents really are the biggest thrill.
Making Christmas! Making Christmas!
Personally speaking, I think it not only slowed the film down, but it ruined the tempo of the song. With that Melting Man Town character, they would actually use a heat blower to melt them between frames and animate the droop. That's pretty awesome. Making Christmas was one of those few songs that Selick asked Elfman to rework because he wanted to be able to go into Christmas Town and have the music change back and forth to get that juxtaposition of spookiness and jolliness. The first draft of Making Christmas was a big epic song, but it ran way too long simply because there was an endless amount of material that Elfman came up with. We cut back to Christmas Town to see Santa getting ready, only to have those snot-nosed trick-or-treaters kidnap him.
Trick or treat!
Sally attempts to warn Jack again, but he tells her he's no longer the Pumpkin King, but instead Sandy Claus. With Halloween Town gearing up for Christmas, Boogie's kids finally show up with the great Sandy Claus.
What a pleasure to meet you. What? Why, you have hands. You don't have claws at all.
Where am I?
Surprised, aren't you? I knew you would be.
Jack reassures Santa that he will take good care of the holiday, then asks Lock, Shock, and Barrel to take him somewhere safe. Of course, they take Sandy Claus to the most unsafe place in Halloween Town and drop him down Boogie's lair, where we finally get a good look of what he looks like through his Oogie Boogie song.
You're joking! You're joking! I can't believe my eyes! You're joking me! You gotta be! This can't be the right guy!
Oogie Boogie wasn't in Burton's original poem. He was added later on to give the story a bit more depth than just having Jack steal Christmas. Burton drew what looked like a potato sack with scary things inside. In his book, Burton on Burton, he said that Boogie was loosely inspired by Cab Calloway's 1932 appearance in a Betty Boop cartoon. Elfman even ended up referencing the Betty Boop cartoon, The Old Man of the Mountain, which also featured Calloway.
Oh, I often sigh and jump and cry at the old man of the mountain.
Originally, Oogie Boogie was supposed to have small bugs dancing on his shoulder, but they cut it out due to the difficulties of creating tiny bug armatures. There was also supposed to be a short little dance bit that was cel animated and projected onto a 3D surface, but it was ultimately removed. Back in town, as everyone starts to get ready for Jack's departure, Sally drops some fog juice and hopes to avoid having Jack leave. In page 65 of the original script, Sally planned on giving Jack some of her sleeping potion tea, but suddenly a thick fog appeared. Happy she won't need it, she dumps it out. In the final film, they made her be the one who caused the thick fog.
If I wanted to single out one moment, one specific thing that always gets me, this was something Joe did, and there's this amazing sweetness to this weird little kid that could end up just being creepy, but there's a point in the film, you've been introduced to him, he's already sort of sweet and likable, like Joe Ranft himself. And then there's a moment when it looks like, Jack Skelling's have been shot down, things are going terribly wrong, and this kid goes, "There goes Christmas."
There goes Christmas.
And it's just this moment where this crazy idea, these aren't monsters. They may look like monsters. Their job may be to frighten people, but they have souls, and that's just it for me.
Unfortunately for Sally, Jack's been doing his research and realizes Zero can act as his Rudolph and guide him through the fog. Jack departs and flies into the dark skies, which were made by using cotton. Sally watches Jack fly off, and we're led into her first musical number.
I sense there's something in the wind that feels like tragedies at hand.
The original script of the film had Sally almost be kind of an annoying character. She's constantly talking about her feelings aloud, which would have been a mistake since we're perfectly able to understand where she's at based on her facial expressions and decisions. Personally, I think if they kept her original dialogue, by the time we got to Sally's song, many audience members would have been done with her. In the final product, Sally's song works so well because we finally get to hear what she's thinking. It confirms any doubts the audiences had of her intentions. In the commentary, Selick points out that this is his favorite song because it gives Sally a chance to show she isn't just a ragdoll, but instead a character with deep emotions. Even though her character is always falling apart, she's the most grounded person in Halloween Town, something Santa later reminds us of.
So Catherine did such a good job because Sally's character shouldn't and couldn't be a real strong belting singer. She has to have a voice for her character that just barely gets the sound out, and I thought Catherine nailed it perfectly.
Jack soars through the skies and arrives at his first house where he greets a young boy who has woken up. In page 67 of the first draft, it basically added in the parents seeing Jack before the young boy and showed them looking for weapons to use against Jack. After seeing the horrifying present that was left, the police are called and we dive into a montage of all the presents Jack is leaving underneath everyone's Christmas trees. People start to lock up any entrances to their houses and the military is dispatched. One of the toys left during this montage was inspired by Mickey Mouse, and because it's technically a Disney film, the studio was okay with the twisted depiction of their mascot. Back in Halloween Town, Sally attempts to rescue Sandy Claus by using her detached arm. As they near their escape, the bad guy starts to close in. Boogie catches them and sucks them back into his lair. The first draft originally would have shown Sally's hand pulling the end of Boogie's thread, revealing his shapeless bug body, then falling apart making it look like he died. As Sally and Santa begin to escape, Boogie would form himself back together. I'm thinking that this was changed to save the reveal until Jack confronted him and to keep that pace up, which I know I keep saying. Most of the time, after a first draft is written, writers will often go back and tighten up the script even more to keep the film moving, so that probably explains a lot of the changes here. Jack continues to fly with Zero and the skeleton reindeer as missiles start to come in.
To hit us. Zero!
As he starts to worry about his Christmas plan probably not being a good idea, Jack is shot down and seemingly falls to his death.
Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night.
The citizens of Halloween Town see Jack get blown up, and so the mayor starts announcing Jack's tragic demise. At the same time, the police announce that the imposter Santa has been shot down. In his absolute lowest point, we see Jack lying in shame at the cemetery as he sings Poor Jack.
What have I done? What have I done? How could I be so blind?
According to Elfman, Jack's obsession and Poor Jack were always the sister songs that accompanied each other in the sense that they both start with Jack troubled or depressed, then he convinces himself into this hysterical enthusiasm. After turning back to the Pumpkin King, he returns to Halloween Town and sets off to rescue Sally and Sandy Claus from Oogie Boogie. In the original cut of the film, there is a little scene where Lock, Shock, and Barrel grab some popcorn and candy, then go to see Sally and Santa getting ready to be killed by Oogie Boogie. Jack finds the kids spying on Boogie, then scares them away. When the film was near completion, Burton came in to watch a cut of the film with fresh eyes and pulled that scene out. Something Selick has said was a good call since looking back at that scene, it turned the kids from simple mischievous brats to downright awful people. As Boogie prepares to kill his tied up victims, Jack steps in to save the day. In a short confrontation, Jack rips apart a thread holding Boogie together, causing all of his buggy insides to fall into the cauldron. If you thought this interaction between them was short, just read this from the first draft. Essentially, Jack shows up and pushes Boogie over the edge, where he unravels and falls into a pit of crocodile skeletons that start devouring him. In the storyboard, they cut out another piece of the story. It was a storyline that wasn't pursued for a very good reason. When Jack unravels Oogie Boogie, it was originally revealed to be Dr. Finkelstein in disguise.
Now you've done it, Jack! You meddling stick figure! You've crossed the line this time, Jack! I'm Oogie Boogie! You haven't beaten me yet! There's no monster scarier!
Meaner! Hungrier!
Dr. Finkelstein! What are you doing?
Yes, Jack Skellington, it's me. Me, the man who created Sally from bits of flesh and scraps of cloth. But she loves you, Jack, you oblivious twit. As Oogie Boogie, I wanted to teach her a lesson that she'd never forget. I'm through with both of you. I'm going to make myself a new creation. Someone who will appreciate me. Igor! Master! Farewell, Jack Skellington!
Very uncalled for in my opinion. Oogie Boogie always felt like a B-plot happening, so having that twist would have overcomplicated this story. What works about the final film is how simple but well executed everything is. It was Burton's original idea to have Oogie be filled with bugs. Boogie was supposed to be a bit smaller, but they had no choice but to make a huge puppet to convey the idea that he's made of bugs and to show off the reveal at the end. Any downtime crew members had on set, they would make little bugs for Boogie, as it was something they needed a lot of but wasn't the absolute highest priority. With Boogie defeated, Jack apologizes to Santa Claus for all the harm he's caused. After Santa flies away to fix Christmas, the mayor and the rest of the residents find Jack and Sally in Boogie's lair. Santa flies through the world fixing any harm that was done, and Jack returns to Halloween Town as we hear the reprise for This Is Halloween. Santa passes by Halloween Town, and with snow falling, the residents there experience the true feeling of Christmas for the first time. There's the shot where the vampires are playing hockey using a pumpkin as a hockey puck. Instead of the pumpkin, they were originally supposed to be playing with Tim Burton's head, but they felt it was probably a little too much. Jack looks around town and is happy to see everyone is experiencing the same things he felt in Christmas Town, but notices Sally has gone away. As she plucks a flower, we go straight into the final musical number for the film, where Jack and Sally finally join together on top of the snowy hilltop. And with the crossing of two holiday worlds, this town and their residents will never be the same again. For the ending with Jack and Sally, they stripped down the set as much as they could because at that point, it was simply about the two characters. It was also important that the last shot be the snowy Spiral Hill to emphasize what Christmas brought onto Halloween Town. With the film wrapped up, now is a great time to take a look at our story wheel and see if there are any setups or payoffs. For the first one, we start out the film with This Is Halloween as Jack is introduced as the Pumpkin King, and we hear a reprise to the song when Jack returns to Halloween Town alive after they thought he died. In this next one, I noticed some shot parallels. This is when Jack returns to Halloween Town with the idea to steal Christmas, and this is when Jack returns to Halloween Town having learned his lesson after he almost ruined Christmas. The next one is more location based. This is when Jack's lament plays at the graveyard where he sings about wanting more to life, and this is when poor Jack plays at a graveyard in the human world where he initially regrets his decisions before coming to the conclusion that he at least did something new with his life.
What the heck? I went and did my best, and my God, I really tasted something swell.
This is the part in the story where Jack sings What's This after experiencing Christmas Town.
Oh look, what's this? The hanging mistletoe? They kiss? Why that looks so unique.
And this is when the citizens of Halloween sing What's This after snow starts raining on top of Halloween Town.
What's this?
What's this?
I haven't got a clue.
What's this?
Why, it's completely new.
This is when we hear Jack's obsession, and this is when we hear Poor Jack. According to Elfman, these are the sister songs of the film since they both start low and end with an enthusiastic Jack. This is when Sally picks out the flowers. We first see her picking out one after she leaves Jack her gift, and we last see her picking one out right before Jack reveals his feelings to her. Speaking of the ending, this is when we first see the Spiral Hill in this dark, gloomy scenery as Jack sings alone, and this is the last time we see the Spiral Hill. Now it's covered in this jolly snow while Jack and Sally stand on top of it together after both revealing their feelings. This is when Jack is researching Christmas and we see him reading about Rudolph, and this is when Jack gets the idea to use Zero as his own Rudolph to guide him through the foggy skies. Lastly, this is when we initially see Sally's arm being torn off by Dr. Finkelstein. This is when she jumps out of her room and resews herself, and this is when she uses her dismembered leg to try and lure Oogie Boogie away from Santa Claus. Some pretty good setups and payoffs in this one. I'm sure I missed a few, so if you have any more, please leave them in the comment below and I'll pin it so we can all learn from this story. From concept to screen, Nightmare Before Christmas took 20 years to get made. Not only did Tim Burton have to gain high commercial success and critical acclaim, but he had to find the right team of passionate animators to bring his stop-motion vision to life. Director Henry Selick credits Burton for developing the story, characters, concept, tone, and look for the movie. Essentially, Selick stepped in to direct blocking, camera movements, and other miscellaneous things. Selick has said that for the first 8 years or so after the film's release, he couldn't help but only see the film's flaws. And similar to The Grinch, he's grown to love and embrace the film and all of the issues he once had with it. At one point feeling there were too many songs and now claiming there is a perfect amount, which I agree. There are small details that Selick was aware could be questioned, so he would make sure that they added in small pieces of dialogue to make the audience not think too much about it. For example, if Jack is a skeleton, that means he's already dead, which means after he got shot down and they thought he got killed, he technically would have died again. That's why Boogie says,
Jack, but they said you were dead. You must be double dead.
Chris Sarandon, who did Jack's speaking voice, was unhappy with some of the line deliveries, so he went to the studio with Burton to re-record some of his dialogue. Before starting those 2 days, he was sent a black and white VHS tape of the rough cut for the film. According to Sarandon, he popped in the tape and started watching the movie. His kids overheard, walked into the room, and got glued to the TV screen. This was Sarandon's first indication that the film would be something kids would enjoy. Even though the film was somewhat forgotten after its initial release, it still gained success in the following years. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, a first for an animated film. The film has since been reissued by Walt Disney Pictures and was re-released annually in Disney Digital 3D from 2006 until 2009, making it the first stop-motion animated feature to be entirely converted to 3D.
For me, if we had had the technology back then, it probably would have shot it in 3D to begin with.
2 solo games were created in 2004 and 2005, with Oogie's Revenge on the PlayStation and The Pumpkin King on Game Boy Advance. The characters from Nightmare Before Christmas later appeared in the Kingdom Hearts games. Following the release of Nightmare, Henry Selick went on to direct the live-action adaptation of James and the Giant Peach, where he reused Jack's puppet for the skeleton captain, often referred to as Captain Jack. Tim Burton has said in interviews that out of all the projects he's worked on, he's happy this film seems to have found its biggest audience since the movie has a lot of emotional value to him. Elfman called this film one of those rare experiences you only get every couple of years. His collaboration with Burton is what made this a great experience and easy to write because it felt like he was in sync with Burton and everything felt clear, simple, and fun. He even went as far as to call this his favorite collaboration with Tim Burton. Based on many interviews, it's clear that many people who worked on this found it a rewarding experience. Tim Burton, Henry Selick, and Danny Elfman have all commented on how they saw a lot of themselves in Jack's character, and I believe that's why this movie made an impact on so many people throughout the years. Watching movies like Frankenstein as a kid, Burton felt Jack was a representation of a character that looked scary, but really wasn't. In the beginning of the film, we quickly find out that just because they look like monsters doesn't mean they aren't nice.
That's our job.
But we're not mean in our town of Halloween.
As humans, we've all at one point felt stereotyped or criticized for one reason or another, when in reality, there's more than meets the eye. And just like Jack Skellington, we've all experienced the feeling of being trapped or stuck in the same repeating day, and yearning for that new thrilling experience or idea to come around. And you try it out with the hopes of it changing something that you're unhappy with about your life, and it may work, or it may completely fail, but at the end of the day, you went that distance and tried something new. Regardless of the outcome, it's a new experience you can recount for ages because the scariest thing isn't what monster hides underneath your bed, it's the feeling of losing touch with reality and feeling glued to one thing. So go out and try something new. Sometimes in life or with any artistic endeavor, you feel you should be happy based on the facts surrounding you, but then you get a gut feeling that even though everything is technically going well, there's something wrong and you're not feeling as fulfilled as you once thought. It's like when you look at a painting. It may not immediately make sense, but the feeling it gives you is what really matters. Don't be afraid of failure and find your own Christmas town, because as Jack Skellington said, just because you cannot see it doesn't mean you can't believe it. There's been reports in early 2019 that a new Nightmare Before Christmas was in the works, whether it's a stop-motion sequel or a live-action remake. Even though I don't think we need either of those, I wouldn't be opposed to it as long as it's well made, and if not, we'll always have the original. But that concludes today's video. This went on for a lot longer than I originally expected, so I hope you learned something new. As for me, I'm gonna keep shooting because I've been trying to get this one shot for 6 days now. Until our next rental, be kind to others and keep watching movies.